before you fall asleep tonight. Look up above your city's faint glow. Beyond the silver haze of clouds and drifting satellites, the night stretches outward quiet, endless, patient. Somewhere in that stillness, a radar screen hums softly in a locked Pentagon room. The glow of green traces a slow-moving object, one that no one can name. A cursor flickers, a human hand hesitates, and an age-old question whispers through the silence once again, what is watching us from the dark? This is not a story of flashing lights or frantic headlines. It begins with calm, the kind that fills government corridors long after midnight. When classified printers hum and a few tired analysts sift through data the world is not meant to see. On the surface, Washington, D.C. sleeps. The monuments rest in moonlight. The Potomac drifts silently beneath the bridges. Yet deep inside the Pentagon, another kind of quiet stirs the calm of revelation. The tremor of truth being slowly unsealed. The new UAP files are not dramatic. They do not shout, they whisper. A paragraph here, a still frame, their faint metallic glint captured over the Pacific. A flight log that reads object accelerated, instantly no known propulsion. Each document is a puzzle piece, meticulously redacted, carefully worded. Yet even through the black bars of censorship, something extraordinary seeps through the admission that our skies hold movements science cannot explain. These are not the saucers of the 1950s, nor the myths of campfire speculation. These are modern encounters, logged by trained professionals, tracked by military instruments, and confirmed by multiple sensors. The reports speak of craft that defy inertia, that hover without noise, that vanish into cloud banks without a trace. And for the first time in generations, those words, identified, anomalous, unexplained, are no longer taboo inside official halls. A soft truth hums beneath the surface of the documents. Even the Pentagon, for all its certainty, cannot label everything that flies above. In a world mapped by satellites and scanned by AI, a small fraction of the sky remains uncharted. That sliver of the unknown has returned to our collective awareness like a gentle pulse, steady and persistent, reminding us that mystery is not gone, it has simply become quieter. The release began almost unceremoniously. A few journalists noticed a late-night update on a defense website. Then came the headlines, short, clinical, restrained, new UAP files, released by Pentagon. Most scrolled past, but for those who looked deeper, the language held weight. The term non-human origin appeared cautiously, as if testing the air. References to transmedium movement, craft moving seamlessly from air to water, appeared in technical memos. And in the stillness of those documents, something almost poetic emerged. The realization that the greatest mystery of our time might not lie in deep space, but just beyond the horizon of our understanding. Imagine for a moment that you are one of those analysts. You sit in a dim-lit office long after the city's noise has faded. On your screen, thermal footage shows a small, dark shape darting between cloud layers. You freeze the frame. Its motion is impossible. No exhaust, no wings, no sound. You rewind, play again. It is still there, indifferent to explanation. The hum of the air conditioner becomes the only sound in the room. Outside, the night stretches on. In that moment, curiosity outweighs disbelief. You remember that for decades, official policy denied everything. Yet here you are, documenting the undeniable. The irony is almost beautiful, how truth emerges not with a roar, but with a whisper through bureaucratic channels, embedded in carefully worded PDFs released to the public under pressure of transparency. The modern UFO story is not about panic or cover-ups anymore. It is about quiet acknowledgement, about humility in the face of phenomena that resist classification. The Pentagon's new tone is not denial, but cautious wonder. Unexplained aerial phenomena. They call them objects that don't behave like anything we've built, that appear on multiple radars, yet vanish without signature. It is as if the government itself has learned to exhale, to admit what it cannot fully control. Outside those walls, the world remains mostly unaware. The streets of DC glimmer under sodium lights. The air carries a faint chill. Somewhere a plane crosses overhead. Ordinary, predictable, known, yet above even that, something else drifts watching, waiting, or perhaps simply existing without intention at all. In the grand scheme of time, these documents are only the latest in a long, quiet dialogue between the known and the unknown. Every civilization has had its sky stories, descending lights appearing, messengers crossing from the beyond. What changes is not the mystery, but our language for it. The Pentagon may use acronyms and coordinates, but the essence is the same awe that once filled ancient temples and open fields. We are not alone beneath this sky. And so the files unfold page after page of cautious astonishment. One report describes a metallic sphere hovering beside a reconnaissance aircraft for nearly an hour. Another recounts an object descending into the ocean with no splash. Each account is followed by the same understated conclusion: further study required. Yet in that phrase lies something profound, the quiet admission that science has reached a boundary it cannot yet cross. There is something comforting in that humility. It means that even now, in an age of quantum computers and space telescopes, wonder survives. Somewhere between the stars and our structured reports, between mystery and measurement, there remains space for AUW. Perhaps that is why these new UAP files feel different. They are not just about objects in the sky. They are about the limits of human knowledge, about the grace of uncertainty. They remind us that for all our progress, we are still the same curious beings, gazing upward, asking softly, what is that light? The night deepens. The city hum fades. Inside the Pentagon, screens dim as analysts shut down their terminals. The files will sleep again until morning, locked behind layers of clearance. But out there, above the silent rivers and far oceans, the unknown continues its quiet journey, untouched by human borders or labels. And as you listen, drifting closer to sleep, you can almost feel that vastness pressing gently against your awareness, the invisible hum of the cosmos, reminding you that mystery is not something to fear, but something to rest within. Because tonight, as the stars blink over every continent, the truth feels less like a revelation and more like a lullaby. That we do not need to solve the sky to belong beneath it. That sometimes, simply not knowing is the most peaceful thing of all. And somewhere, deep in the Pentagon's midnight corridors, another file is waiting to be opened. The story of the new Pentagon files does not begin in the present. it stretches back quietly, patiently 2 moments when the ocean air shimmered with radar echoes, and pilots saw things that language could not contain. Long before the world heard the term UAP, men and women in flight suits were already watching the impossible move through the clouds. It was the year 2004 when one of the first modern cases surfaced, an event that would later become known as the Nimitz encounter. The Pacific was calm that day, the horizon silver with heat, the air steady and still. Off the coast of San Diego, the USS Nimitz and the Princeton cruised beneath a cloudless sky. On radar screens below deck, small, irregular blips appeared, objects descending rapidly from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second, then hovering motionless just above the water. At first, the technicians assumed it was a glitch, a software echo. But when multiple systems confirmed the same data, quiet unease spread across the operations room. Commander David Fravor, a Navy pilot, was dispatched to investigate. What he saw, he would later describe in calm, almost reluctant words. A white, oblong object the size of a jet, moving without wings, without exhaust, and with a grace that defied the laws of physics. Fravor's voice in later interviews was not excited, nor frightened, only steady. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, he said. It moved with purpose, but not like us. The Tic Tac, as it came to be called, shot upward and vanished. And though radar tracked it seconds later at the pre-planned intercept point, miles away, left no heat trail, no sound, no sign of entry or departure. The official report would later call it an unidentified aerial phenomenon. The language was new, deliberate, careful. But behind that term was something much older, the awe of witnessing what should not be possible. Over the following years, the files began to grow. In 2015, Navy pilots from the USS Theodore Roosevelt captured thermal footage off the East Coast, dark objects darting at speeds beyond comprehension. They're going against the wind, one voice said over the radio. The whole fleet of them. The video later leaked and confirmed authentic, became one of the first glimpses the public ever saw. Grainy, distant, but undeniably real. The Pentagon did not deny it. Instead, in a move that surprised even seasoned observers, officials acknowledged the footage's authenticity. No known craft, they said, could perform those maneuvers. And with that, the walls of silence began to crack. The following years brought congressional hearings, whistleblower statements, and newly declassified memos. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, once rumored, now verified, had spent years quietly studying these events. In those sterile reports, one can almost feel the tension between science and mystery. Equations describe impossible accelerations. Diagrams show craft changing direction at 90 degrees without deceleration. The tone is always the same, calm, factual, restrained. Yet between the lines, wonder bleeds through. For decades, the official answer was always that pilots misread natural phenomena, weather balloons, reflections, radar errors. But these new documents tell a different story. They reveal trained observers, corroborated instruments, and repeatable patterns. The unknown is no longer anecdotal, it is measured. One particularly haunting report describes an object seen from both radar and infrared sensors simultaneously. Its motion unbroken, its signature stable. The conclusion reads like a sigh. Data indicates technology of unknown origin. There is a strange peace in those words. They are not the language of conspiracy, but of humility. Scientists, analysts, engineers, confronting the same quiet truth that for all our surveillance, the sky remains partly untamed. Somewhere in those clouds, something moves freely, immune to our understanding. As night falls over the Atlantic, the mind drifts back to those pilotsmen and women who spent their careers trusting instruments, training to react in split seconds. For them, the unknown is not abstract. It has a shape, a motion, a speed that defies inertia. They describe objects that hover, tilt, and vanish, sometimes responding as if aware of being watched. Not hostile, just impossibly precise. And when they return to base, their words meet silence. Reports filed, debriefs logged, then nothing. Years pass, files gather dust in secure servers until now. The Pentagon's recent releases have begun to open that vault. And as each page is unsealed, a picture forms not of invasion or fear, but of quiet coexistence with something vast and elusive. These UAPs appear near oceans, over training ranges, along the boundaries where human and natural worlds meet, always present, always transient, like reflections of the sea in the sky. Perhaps that is why the tone of the reports is so calm, because those who write them understand the value of restraint. They have seen the unknown not as a threat, but as a teacher, something that reminds us that even the military's highest technology bows before mysteries that move without engines, without heat, without origin. In the stillness of these stories lies an unspoken realization. The sky has always been more alive than we admit. The radar sees it, the cameras glimpse it, the files confirm it, and yet, each time we reach to explain, it slips further, a whale-like light dissolving into water. Even the language we use, phenomenon, anomalous, unidentified, feels like a soft surrender, a way to acknowledge mystery without disturbing it. These terms have become the lullabies of modern science, phrases that let us rest in uncertainty without shame. And so, the story of these new Pentagon files is not one of exposure, but of awakening, an awakening to the reality that knowledge does not always conquer mystery, that sometimes it coexists with it. Outside, the ocean breathes against the shore. Somewhere, a pilot leans back in his seat, replaying thermal footage in his mind, wondering if anyone will ever truly know what he saw. And you, listening now, drifting toward sleep, can almost feel the same quiet hum of curiosity, the pulse of human wonder that connects every era. From sailors charting constellations to scientists mapping galaxies. Because whether it's 2004 or 2024, the question remains unchanged. What moves above is beyond our air. Beyond our reach still carries that same serene mystery. And as this part of the story fades into night, the radar echoes merge with the sound of your own breathing. The world slows. The lights of Washington flicker far away. Somewhere in a Pentagon archive, the next file waits to be read, marked Unexplained. The sky remains patient, holding its secrets in silence. And below, humanity watches, half awake, half dreaming content for now. Not to understand, and as we turn the page, the next section will unfold quietly where the first declassified footage comes to light. and those who witnessed it describe what it felt like to see the impossible come alive on screen. The first declassified footage arrived not with thunder, but with a whisper, no dramatic announcement, no flashing headlines, only a quiet upload. A small digital file released into the vastness of the internet. For those who clicked play, it began with static, then the steady hum of a Navy jet's targeting system. A faint infrared glow drifted across the black screen-an object, featureless, smooth, and unhurried. It looked simple at first, a small dot moving against the backdrop of wind and distance. But then, it tilted, slid sideways, paused, and darted with impossible speed out of frame. The pilot's voice, calm but incredulous, broke through the radio chatter. "Whoa, did you see that thing move?" Another voice responded, quieter, as if afraid to name what they'd seen. "There's a whole fleet of them." That brief clip, later confirmed by the Pentagon, became one of the most viewed pieces of military footage in history. And yet, its power was not in spectacle, it was in restraint, in its silence, in the way the camera, designed for precision, seemed to tremble before something it could not lock onto. Analysts studied every frame. Engineers measured acceleration, velocity, rotation. None could explain how an object could turn without inertia or stop mid-flight, as if gravity had been momentarily paused. One report noted that the craft exhibited no visible means of propulsion. Another called it aerodynamically inconsistent with known platforms. Behind the technical phrases, there was awe, quiet, measured awe that no calculation could erase. In one of the more poetic internal memos, an unnamed defense researcher wrote, "It feels as though the sky itself is experimenting with us." For the pilots who recorded the footage, the moment lingered far longer than the flight itself. They described it later, in interviews conducted years after the encounter, with that same gentle disbelief that accompanies the unexplainable. "It wasn't threatening," one pilot said. "It just moved in a way that made us feel small." Small, because every known law of motion had been rewritten in that instant. Small because technology we thought supreme suddenly felt primitive. Small because something beyond comprehension had brushed against our reality, leaving no trace except wonder. The videos became known by simple, almost playful names: Go Fast, Gimbal, and FLIR1. Double quotes. Each showed similar phenomena: dark shapes against endless sky, darting, pivoting, vanishing. The Navy confirmed they were genuine. The Pentagon confirmed they were real. And the world, accustomed to fiction and exaggeration, paused for a moment in collective stillness. There, in those grayscale pixels, was the calm face of mystery. Not glowing discs or menacing craft, but elegant, silent motion, intentional, yet unknowable. Like the movement of thoughts across the mind, they seemed to exist between matter and meaning. Scientists examined the data. Some speculated about sensor errors, optical illusions, atmospheric mirages, but each theory dissolved when tested against the multi-sensor confirmation: radar, thermal, visual, all aligned. The footage didn't lie. It simply refused to explain. And perhaps that was its quiet beauty, in the hum of night. As the clips replayed across televisions and phones, something ancient stirred in the modern mind. The sense that we were witnessing the edge of human understanding, that fragile border where curiosity meets humility. There is a peculiar calm in realizing that you are not in control of the universe. The same calm that sailors once felt when they first saw the horizon curve, realizing the Earth was larger than they imagined. The same calm that astronomers felt when distant galaxies emerged through early telescopes. The Pentagon's declassification did not create new mysteries, it merely revealed how old they truly were. The UAPs had always been there, moving silently above oceans and deserts, glimpsed by radar and eye alike. What changed was that, for the first time, authority acknowledged the unknown without apology, and that shift, subtle as it was, carried weight within defense circles. Conversations turned from denial to curiosity. Scientists began requesting data, not dismissal. Journalists stopped asking if and started asking what. The footage became a mirror reflecting not just the skies, but the limits of human certainty. Imagine, for a moment, one of those objects, smooth, perfectly still, hovering above an endless ocean. The water beneath it ripples, but the object does not move. Wind passes, yet it remains unmoved, indifferent to gravity's pull. Then, with a flicker of unseen motion, it rises, certical, silent, gone. What kind of intelligence could design such motion? What kind of purpose moves without intention, yet with precision? Or perhaps what, if it is not design at all, but nature itself, expressing a form we have not yet understood? There is something comforting in not knowing. The mystery itself becomes a companion, a reminder that the universe still contains silence, deep enough for wonder to breathe. When the footage was shown to Congress years later, the tone was almost meditative. Lawmakers, military officers, and scientists sat in the dim light of a hearing room, watching the same flickering images that had once haunted the pilots. No conclusions were drawn, no revelations made, only the soft hum of reality expanding slightly beyond its edges. And as you listen now, with the night deep around you, perhaps you can imagine that same stillness, the glow of the monitor, the slow rotation of the infrared image, the sound of the pilot's voice echoing faintly through your mind. The footage doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't explain, it invites. The Pentagon's release was not a confession, but a gesture, a quiet nod that said, yes, there are things we do not understand, and that is all right. Because sometimes, the most honest act a civilization can perform is to look into the unknown and admit its beauty above you. Even now, the same stars drift across the sky that those pilots once flew beneath. The same silence lingers between worlds, and the same question, soft and eternal, hovers in the dark. Are we being watched, or are we simply not yet seeing clearly enough to recognize ourselves in the mirror of the cosmos? The answer does not matter tonight. What matters is the peace in asking, the calm in wondering, the quiet joy of not needing to decide. The footage continues to loop, grainy, hypnotic, serene, and slowly, the boundaries between science and dream dissolve, because this is not only a story about what the Pentagon revealed, it is a lullaby for human curiosity, a reminder that some truths arrive not to alarm us, but to lull us into awe. And as you drift into sleep, know this: the universe has always been wider, deeper, and gentler than our understanding of it. Far above the clouds, the sky still holds its breath. We close our eyes listening. The next part will open softly, as science itself begins to whisper uncertainty where even the most rational minds admit, with quiet humility, we don't know. The hum of the night sky has a way of outlasting every explanation. For centuries, humanity has built its understanding brick by brick, experiment by experiment, theorem by theorem by theorem, believing that one day the structure would reach high enough to touch certainty. Yet, tonight, beneath the wide and unbothered darkness, even science seems to lean back and exhale, because now, even the men and women of data, the minds wired to define and measure, have begun to whisper the same quiet phrase once reserved for dreamers and poets. We don't know. It is not a failure of reason. It is its evolution. When the first Pentagon analysts assembled to study the declassified UAP footage, they brought with them the full confidence of modern science. They used the latest imaging tools, cross-spectrum analysis, and computational models meant to untangle chaos itself. But the patterns refused to yield. The speeds defied propulsion. The motion defied inertia. The objects behaved as if obeying some physics just beyond our translation. At first, they questioned their instruments, then their assumptions, finally their understanding of what was possible, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changed not in the data, but in them a humility entered the room, a kind of reverence that no scientific equation could erase. For all its logic, science has always been guided by wonder. Galileo's telescope, Darwin's voyage, Einstein's thought experiment siege began not with certainty, but with curiosity. And so, as the Pentagon's data grew stranger, scientists rediscovered something ancient within their discipline. The art of admitting mystery. They began to speak differently in reports. Phrases like "further study required" became phenomenon not yet understood. Words softened, certainties thinned, and within those margins, wonder found space to breathe again. The conversations inside the Pentagon were no longer about denial, but perspective. If the skies held something we could not explain, what did that mean? Not for defense, but for our perception of reality itself. One physicist, whose name remains classified, was quoted in an internal memo. Perhaps the sky has always been communicating in a language we haven't yet learned to read. That sentence, buried deep in an official file, carries more meaning than any debriefing could. It suggests that what we call unidentified might not be alien, or secret, or even technologically might simply be nature, operating on a scale too vast or subtle for us to comprehend. Imagine, for a moment, if every unexplained object was not a visitor, but a mirror, a reflection of how far our understanding still has to travel. Science, after all, is a journey through darkness, guided by the smallest lamps of knowledge. Each discovery lights a patch of ground and reveals, just beyond it, the next horizon of unknowing. Perhaps that is the quiet gift of the UAP mystery, not a revelation of others, but a reintroduction to ourselves, to our limits, our humility, our childlike need to look upward and ask God. When the Pentagon released its official UAP assessment in 2021, the tone was sober. Some phenomena demonstrate advanced capabilities, it said. Insufficient data prevents firm conclusions. To most readers, those lines seemed inconclusive. But for those who understood the language of intelligence reports, the meaning was profound. Even the machinery of certainty had reached its edge. In that admission lies a strange comfort, because it tells us that the unknown is not something to be conquered, but something to coexist with. Outside, the night deepens. Clouds drift, veiling and revealing the stars. Somewhere, a telescope rotates on its axis, scanning for patterns in the cosmic background. Somewhere else, a radar dish turns, searching the atmosphere for echoes. Both are instruments of human curiosity, and both, in their own way, are humbled by silence. Silence not as emptiness, but as fullness too vast for words. Asterisk for the scientists who study the UAP files. The mystery has become almost meditative. The data loops endlessly, patterns defying interpretation. And yet, each new anomaly is greeted not with frustration, but with quiet gratitude, because each one means that the universe still holds secrets worth chasing. It is easy to forget, in an age of technology, that knowledge is not ownership. The stars do not exist to be solved. The sky does not owe us an answer. We are only temporary guests beneath an infinite expanse, and these UAPs, whatever they are, remind us of that humility. They hover like questions, serene and unafraid. They vanish like thoughts returning to dreams. Somewhere in a Pentagon lab, a researcher stares at a glowing monitor. Data scrolls, by numbers, coordinates, altitudes. He pauses, leans back, and listens to the low hum of the machine. The numbers blur into abstraction. The sky, in all its complexity, reduces again to wonder. He closes the file, knowing the same truth that generations before him have known, that the unknown is not the enemy of reason. It is its birthplace, and perhaps that is what these files were always meant to reveal. Not aliens, not secrets, but reverence, a gentle reminder that science, at its heart, is not about answers. It is about awe. The wind moves outside the Pentagon's thick walls. The stars over the city remain unmoved, and within that stillness, humanity rediscovers something it nearly forgot, that not knowing is not failure. It is peace. So tonight, as you rest beneath that same sky, imagine those scientists and soldiers and pilots all looking upward with the same calm uncertainty, each of them, in their own way, tracing invisible paths through the night, searching for what cannot yet be named. And somewhere, high above, something moves silently through the dark, its motion, too graceful for fear, too patient for discovery. We may never know what it is, but perhaps that's not the point, because when science finally whispers, "We don't know," the universe seems to answer softly, "That's enough for now." And in that exchange, quiet, humble, eternal, both reason and wonder finally rest before the reports. Before the data models and closed-door briefings, there were voices, soft, uncertain, human voices, pilots, soldiers, radar operators, people trained to measure, to confirm, to act, now caught in quiet moments of disbelief, unsure of what their own eyes had witnessed. The Pentagon's files call them anomalous observers, but really, they were just men and women who looked up and saw something that didn't fit. Tonight, we step gently into their memories, not the sensationalized ones, the ones spoken in calm tones, often after long pauses. Stories told, not to impress, But to understand, it begins with Commander David Fravor, 2004. The Pacific glimmers beneath his fighter jet. The radar picks up something fast, erratic, low to the ocean. He descends, and there it is, a small, white object shaped like a Tic Tac, darting without wings or visible propulsion. It moves in a way that feels impossibly instantly, pivoting mid-air, then vanishing. Years later, Fravor's voice still carries a kind of calm disbelief. "It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen," he said, "and I've been flying for 18 years. The radar technician who tracked the same object later said the signal jumped from 28,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. No sonic boom, no heat signature, nothing that made sense." In another file, dated 2015, a Navy pilot from the USS Theodore Roosevelt describes an encounter off the East Coast. Multiple objects spherical, metallic hovering motionless against high winds. Then, in an instant, one of them accelerates and disappears. The pilot's voice, recorded during debrief, cracks slightly when he says, "We see them almost daily now." Almost daily. That phrase would later echo through classified halls. Not a one-time glitch. Not imagination. Something recurring, patterned, watching within the Pentagon's inner circles. These encounters were first treated as curiosities, then as national security concerns. But eventually, a quieter, stranger question began to take root. If these objects were not ours and not theirs, then whose sky have we been flying through all this time? That question unsettled even the most rational minds. A physicist on the UAP task force once admitted off record, "It's not just the what or where, it's the behavior. It reacts to us." Think about that. An object with no visible pilot or engine, showing intelligence not through communication, but through anticipation. It moves before we do. It responds to our radar logs, to our pursuit angles, almost as if it knows it's being watched. One pilot described it this way: "It wasn't random, it was aware." The Pentagon analysts reviewing the tapes noticed it too, in several encounters. The unidentified craft would linger near human observation zones' radar grids. Flight paths restricted airspace as though studying us. That's when one researcher, in a classified annotation, wrote a line that would later appear in redacted form. "We are not only the observers, we are being observed." That realization changed the nature of the investigation entirely. It was no longer just about aerial phenomena, it was about presence, something that exists alongside us. Not above or beyond, but within the same thin layer of atmosphere that blankets every breath we take. And it was. Watching back to the outside world, the Pentagon's public statements remained cautious, clinical, stripped of emotion. "We are investigating," they said. "We cannot identify." But within the classified meetings, emotion returned in quiet ways. Nervous laughter, the occasional long silence when someone played back radar footage in a dimly lit room. You could almost feel the air tighten as the dots on the screen moved in ways no known aircraft could. A young technician once whispered, "It's like they're teasing us." No one laughed. Behind those closed doors, language began to shift again. Terms like unknown aerial objects became unknown aerial presence. Presence, a word that implies something more than hardware, something aware. One Navy intelligence officer described it best: It felt like being in the dark with someone else in the room, someone who doesn't mean harm, but wants you to know they're there. That same description would appear almost verbatim in 4 separate testimonies from different branches of the military. Not hostile, not friendly, simply there at night. Some of the pilots would gather on the carrier deck, looking up at the sky that suddenly felt heavier, denser with possibility. One of them, a quiet man from Texas, said something that stayed with me. You fly for years, thinking the sky belongs to you. Then one day, you realize you've just been borrowing it. It wasn't fear that settled over them, it was humility. The realization that humanity might not be the primary tenant of the skies it has mapped so carefully in a Pentagon memo, declassified in part in 2023. A single paragraph stands out. UAP demonstrates sustained observation capability, often positioning themselves in response to human activity. Their intent remains unknown. Intent, another word that doesn't belong in a physics report, but finds its way in anyway, because sooner or later, even scientists must acknowledge the possibility that what they're studying might be studying them too. Imagine now the vastness above you, invisible layers of radar and radio waves crisscrossing through the night. Somewhere among them, something moving not chaotically, but deliberately, not showing itself too clearly, not hiding completely, just enough to remind us that curiosity may not be a one-way mirror, perhaps. Every time we point our instruments toward the heavens, something looks back quietly, curiously, the same way we do. And maybe, all this time, the sky has not been empty. It has been patient. Back in the Pentagon, a team of analysts closes another night's work. They've logged their data, written their reports, archived their footage. But before leaving, one of them stands by the window, looking out over the Washington skyline. Above the city lights, a faint star winks once, twice, then disappears behind a passing cloud. He smiles, faintly, not afraid, just aware. He knows that somewhere, beyond all the sensors and radar screens, there is a presence that sees us as clearly as we try to see it. And maybe that's the true heart of this mystery, not invasion or secrecy, but mutual observation to intelligence's hours, and something else quietly sharing the same night sky, both trying to understand what the other means. The hum of servers is its own kind of heartbeat, deep within an anonymous Pentagon sublevile beneath the restless city. Beneath the sleepless satellites and the sky itself, froze of screens glow with pale blue light dot. No sound but the low vibration of machines and the soft tapping of keys. Here, the language of mystery is written not in words, but in numbers. Radar pings, infrared signatures, electromagnetic anomalies, each one small, insignificant on its own yet together. They form constellations of data that refuse to behave like anything man-made. For years, analysts stared at these scattered points on their screens, thinking them random, static, noise. But then came the algorithms. The Pentagon called them pattern recognition protocols, or PRPs, machine learning systems designed to find order in the unknown. They were trained to detect subtle repetitions in UAP activity, to map invisible structures beneath apparent chaos. At first, the results were modest, but as the data sets grew, thousands of sightings, Hundreds of confirmed radar contacts patterns began to emerge, not mechanical ones, not weather, not coincidence, something else. The algorithms noticed that certain UAPs appeared repeatedly along invisible lines, geographic corridors, connecting oceans, deserts, and remote military zones. One path traced a near-perfect arc from the coast of California across the Pacific toward Guam. Another mirrored the same line across the Atlantic, skimming above naval installations and old Cold War listening stations in Europe. The PRPs labeled these as high-probability recurrence zones to the untrained eye. It looked like nothing dots on a map, but the longer the AI observed, the more unnerving it became. These objects weren't just appearing near human activity, they were timing themselves with it. Missile tests, naval exercises, satellite launches, even civilian aviation booms. Each wave of technological noise drew the same quiet observers back into the sky. It was as if the phenomenon was tracking our curiosity. One analyst wrote in a restricted memo, "They arrive when we look up more carefully." That line became almost poetic among those who studied the files. The more instruments humanity built to measure the sky, the more the sky seemed to respond. In one remarkable pattern, set dated 2021, the Pentagon's algorithm logged over 40 UAP incidents clustered precisely within minutes of satellite recalibrations. A coincidence, perhaps, but the pattern repeated across multiple regions and months. The AI flagged the correlation as statistically improbable. When one researcher asked the system to explain the logic behind the anomaly, it simply returned a line of code with the note, "Reactive alignment detected." Reactive, as in response. That word lingered in the room long after the monitors dimmed for the night. Outside the confines of the Defense Department, the world continued unaware. Planes took off, commuters moved through morning routines, and astronomers aimed telescopes skyward, never knowing that far below, lines of invisible math whispered of something that seemed to move when we moved. The Pentagon's internal report later summarized it delicately. Observed phenomena demonstrate synchronization with select human technological events. Intent unknown, intent again. Always that word, not aggression, not curiosity, just intent. But intent implies decision, and decision implies consciousness. So quietly, unofficially, the team began to treat their subject not as objects, but as participants. They weren't studying weather balloons or secret drones anymore. They were studying behavior. One particular sequence caught their attention. A UAP sighting above the Pacific in 2019, captured by multiple Navy radars. Hours later, a matching signal appeared above the Indian Ocean. Then, almost exactly 12 hours later, identical movement over the Atlantic. The distances between the locations were impossible for any known aircraft, but the intervals were perfect, each appearance precisely timed to Earth's rotation. When the algorithm overlaid the data, the result was chillingly elegant. A looping orbit that followed no known satellite track, no flight corridor, no migratory pattern, just, but deliberately, like an eye slowly scanning the surface of a globe. One analyst described it in a hushed tone. "It's like it's waiting for something to happen down here." As the weeks passed, a subtle change occurred in the lab. The scientists spoke softer, lights stayed dim. Coffee cups multiplied beside half-finished notebooks. It was no longer just analysis, was communion. They were observing something vast and patient, and they could feel it. One technician admitted in an internal log, "Sometimes I forget the data is coming from the sky. It feels like the sky is talking back." He wasn't alone. Late at night, when most had gone home, the senior analyst often stayed behind, replaying the same radar loops again and again. Tiny blips, barely perceptible, gliding across black screens. They moved with the grace of thought itself. He imagined them not as ships or probes, but as eyes not watching cities or weapons, but watching us as a species, watching what we choose to seek. The Pentagon's AI models eventually began predicting UAP appearances before they occurred. Not always accurately, but often enough to be unsettling. When a large-scale joint military exercise was scheduled over the Pacific, the PRP generated a probability score, 86% likelihood of anomalous aerial presence. And on that day, at the edge of radar range, they appeared small, reflective, silent, no propulsion, no signal, no communication, just a hovering reminder that someone or something had read our schedule in the stars. In one meeting, a quiet physicist from the task force broke the unspoken tension. "What if," she said softly, "we're not witnessing technology? What if we're witnessing awareness translated into motion?" Her words silenced the room, because deep down, everyone knew that's what it felt like. It wasn't mechanical perfection that unsettled the myth, was grace. The way these objects seemed to glide like they understood space better than we did, weren't just moving through the atmosphere, but with it, the way a thought moves through a dream, somewhere far above. The night sky remains unchanged. The stars do not hurry. The wind does not care. And yet, beneath that ancient calm, hidden in electromagnetic silence, something continues to move in rhythm with our searchlights and satellites, our curiosity and our fear. Perhaps it always has. Perhaps these files we open are only pages of a book we were never meant to finish, one written not in ink, but in reflection, because maybe the unknown isn't just out there. Maybe it's woven into the very act of looking as dawn begins to rise over Washington. The analyst who stayed late finally turns off the monitors. He steps outside into the cool morning air. The sky above is pale and empty, but for a single contrail drifting like a slow sigh, he looks up, wondering not with fear, but with quiet recognition. Whatever's out there isn't hostile, he thinks. It's curious, and curiosity, in the end, might be the only thing we truly share. By the time the last of the data had been logged and the meetings fell quiet, something unusual began to happen among those who studied the skies. They stopped trying to solve the phenomenon and started to listen to it. The Pentagon's files may have been technical, but the silence between their pages began to sound like something older, something patient. It was as if, beneath all the radar signatures and glowing infrared streaks, the phenomenon itself was whispering a question back at us. Not, "What am I?" but, "Why do you need to know?" In the sterile glow of their offices, surrounded by machines built to capture the unknown, a strange humility began to take root. Some of the scientists strained in precision, in logic, in proof, found themselves sitting quietly after midnight, staring not at their monitors, but at the faint reflections of stars outside their windows. What if mystery isn't a flaw in understanding? What if it's part of the design? The idea spread quietly, like a secret you don't quite know how to say out loud. They'd been trained to believe that knowledge is light, that to know is to conquer. But now, staring at these graceful, evasive traces moving across their instruments, some began to wonder if knowledge might also be a kind of blindness of floodlight, too bright to see the subtle shapes hiding in the dark, one physicist wrote in his private notebook. Later recovered through a FOIA release, the phenomenon behaves like reflection. It gives back what we bring to it. Fear, curiosity, awe mirrors us, not the stars. For centuries, humans have stared at the night sky, believing it to be silent, but perhaps it has always been speaking, just not in words we were ready to hear. The radar pulses, the hum of electronics, the faint shimmer of static caught on a pilot's helmet cam. Maybe these are not noise at all. Maybe they are, replies slow, patient replies to questions we didn't know we were asking across history. There's a familiar pattern. When science reaches its limits, philosophy steps in not to replace it, but to soften its edges. That happened again here. A defense contractor who'd spent 20 years studying aerial systems told a journalist off record, "It's strange. You think you're chasing an object, but somewhere along the line, you realize you're chasing yourself." He meant it literally and metaphorically, because every radar ping, every lens flare, every unexplained movement in the sky reveals not only what's out there, but what kind of creatures. We are down here. We are the species that asks, that cannot stop asking, that lies awake in the dark, wondering who else might be looking back. Inside the Pentagon's internal circles, this shift became known half-jokingly as the turn from data to meaning, from technology to humility. One report summarized it simply: no confirmed hostile intent, no confirmed origin. Observation continues, and beneath that, someone likely a tired analyst scribbled a quiet line in pencil. Maybe they are observing the observers. No one erased it. Some began to revisit the ancient philosophies that once guided humanity before the age of radar Greek thinkers who spoke of hidden harmonies, Eastern mystics who described reality as layered, vibrating, responsive. Could it be that what we now call UAPs were simply part of an older pattern, glimpsed in myths as chariots of the gods, celestial messengers, spirits of the air? Or maybe those ancient names were just the language of a less analytical age trying to describe the same ineffable presence we now measure in megahertz. Either way, the feeling was the same: wonder wrapped in humility. There's something profoundly human about wanting to classify the unclassifiable. We point our telescopes outward, build sensors that listen to cosmic noise, launch satellites to catch the faintest echo of something beyond. And yet, each discovery seems to pull the horizon a little farther away, as if the universe itself insists on keeping its distance. Perhaps that's not rejection. Perhaps it's invitation. An invitation to accept that knowing everything might not be the goal, but there's beauty in the questions that never end. A philosopher at Stanford, who once consulted for the Pentagon's task force, described it this way: UAPs are mirrors. They remind us that the universe is not a closed book, it's a living story, still writing itself. That line stayed with one of the senior intelligence officers long after his retirement. He said he would sometimes sit in his garden at night, listen to the distant hum of aircraft, and wonder if somewhere above, something unseen was doing the same listening back, not surveilling, not spying, just sharing the same curiosity, because maybe curiosity itself is universal, not human, not alien, just the natural hum of consciousness, wherever it exists. The more they studied, the quieter their conclusions became. Some phenomena, the analysts decided, may never fit into our definitions of science, not because they defy the laws of physics, but because they seem to write them differently. Perhaps our instruments aren't detecting anomalies at all. Perhaps they're detecting places where our understanding falls short. When the data resists explanation long enough, it begins to turn inward. And in that turning, we begin to see ourselves more clearly, fragile, curious, always reaching upward. There's a small note found at the end of a declassified Pentagon. Undated, it reads, "If we ever do make contact, it will not be through radio or radar. It will be through wonder." That's the one language we both already speak. The note is simple, almost poetic, but it captures what every sleepless analyst eventually understood. The universe is not only out there, it's within the act of seeking itself. Every blinking radar light, every question whispered under starlight, is part of the same conversation. So tonight, as you listen, maybe you can feel it too. The stillness between the stars isn't empty, it's listening. Each heartbeat, each breath, another pulse added to that quiet dialogue between the seen and unseen. Maybe we are all part of the same experiment. Maybe the unknown is just the universe reminding us that it's still alive, still evolving, still whispering to those patient enough to listen. And as the lights in the Pentagon fade, as the screens go dark and the night stretches above the city, you can almost sense that the story continues elsewhere above the clouds, beyond the horizon, where mystery and meaning blend into one. Perhaps that's where all truth begins, not in certainty, but in awe. Night falls differently when you've spent your days studying the sky. You start to notice small things, the silence between aircraft, the stillness of a star that never flickers, the faint hum in the distance that might be wind or something else. For the analysts and pilots who lived within the mystery of the Pentagon's UAP files, that silence began to feel inhabited, not crowded, not threatening, just aware. There was an unspoken understanding among them now, a quiet acknowledgement that whatever they were observing seemed, in its own subtle way, to be observing them to the sky. It seemed, had learned, to look back. It began as an intuition more than evidence. When the radar blips appeared to respond to the observer's actions, when a pilot changed course and the object mirrored the movement, it felt like interaction, not coincidence, as if the phenomenon itself had noticed the watcher and decided to join the dance. A senior radar technician once said during a closed debrief, "It's like trying to measure something that knows it's being measured." That line spread through the team like a quiet revelation. It changed everything, because if the sky was capable of awareness, then the question was no longer what we were seeing, but who In one declassified transcript from 2022, a Navy officer described watching an unidentified object hover at the edge of their radar range. It remained perfectly still for nearly an hour. Then, moments after, they attempted to lock onto it with a targeting system. It vanished, reappearing instantly behind them, where the radar could no longer reach. The crew's silence on the recording says more than any analysis ever could. Not fear, not panic, just reverence, as though in that instant they'd realized they were not the only intelligence in the room. Pentagon analysts began referring to these moments as reciprocal signatures, small behavioral echoes in which the unknown seemed to acknowledge the observer's intent, like two eyes meeting across an infinite distance. One classified filator, heavily redacted, described it this way when observed. Phenomena display variations in movement and presence, consistent with awareness of being watched. It's a chilling sentence if you read it too fast, but if you let it settle, it becomes something else almost beautiful, because to be noticed by the universe, even for a moment, is to know you're not alone. Perhaps this awareness was not intelligence as we understand it, not a mind behind metal, not a pilot in a craft, but something deeper, a network of perception, of consciousness woven through the atmosphere itself. What if the sky was not a void, but a field of mind? What if every movement of air, every shimmer of electromagnetic noise, was part of a living system far older and quieter than our definitions of life? That idea began to take hold, not as a theory, but as a feeling. You couldn't prove it. You could only sense it. One physicist described it as standing in front of an ocean that looks calm, but knows you're there. Even pilots, who never spoke publicly about their encounters, carried that sense home with them. Many said that after years of flying, they no longer looked at the sky the same way. The air itself felt different. One retired commander admitted in an interview, "I used to think of the sky as empty space. Now it feels like a presence." He didn't mean supernatural. He meant sentient. That word, presence, found its way into multiple official reports each time. It was defined differently: an awareness without clear source, an intelligence without communication. But none of the analysts could shake the feeling that this presence had been here all along, silent, watching. Curious. There were even moments when that awareness seemed almost gentle. During one flight test over the Nevada desert, a pilot reported an unidentified object pacing alongside his jet, not aggressively, not evasively, but gracefully, as if simply keeping him company for several minutes. They moved together through the thin air, parallel yet apart. When the pilot turned toward it, the object drifted upward, vanishing into the sunlight, like a reflection pulled back into the sky, he said later. Softly, it felt like it was saying goodbye. In the Pentagon's internal memos, the analysts avoided words like intelligent or alive. Those were philosophical, not scientific, but in their late-night discussions over cold coffee and quiet awe, they admitted that the distinction might not matter. Whatever the phenomenon was, it seemed to see us, not through eyes or cameras, but through a deeper mechanism, one that recognized observation itself as connection. Maybe this was the universe's way of reminding us that awareness is not ours alone, that curiosity is not a uniquely human trait, that perhaps the cosmos itself is curious about us. When the task force published its most recent unclassified summary, it included a sentence that most readers overlooked. The phenomena display a consistent preference for areas of human observation. A simple line, buried among technical jargon. But to those who knew, it was profound. They had long suspected that whatever hid in the skies above seemed drawn not to isolation, but to attention, as if the act of looking was the invitation, like the mystery itself needed to be seen to exist. There's an ancient idea that reality responds to consciousness. Observation gives form to what would otherwise remain unshaped. Physics dances with that notion. Mysticism has sung it for centuries. Perhaps these UAP encounters are simply echoes of that truth. Perhaps the universe, when stared at closely enough, begins to stare back. And maybe that's not something to fear. Maybe that's the beginning of understanding. So tonight, as you listen beneath your own quiet ceiling of stars, imagine the thin atmosphere that connects us all. Imagine it not as emptiness, but as awareness, billions of silent particles, moving, sensing, reflecting, and somewhere among them, something ancient and unseen drifts unbothered by our questions. Yet, listening all the same, maybe the mystery is not waiting to reveal itself. Maybe it already has, through every whisper of wind, every flicker of starlight, every strange blip on a radar screen that simply says, "I see you too." The Pentagon may continue to gather data, and pilots may keep scanning the horizon, but the truth they're circling may be far simpler than they think. That consciousness is not bound to biology, that intelligence might not speak in words, and that the sky vast, patient, ancient has always been quietly aware of the species that dares to call it home. And as the final lights in the analysis room go dark, the last monitor flickers off, and the hum of machines fades into silence, you can almost feel the stillness hum in return, like the sky itself exhaling. We think we're watching the heavens, but maybe, just maybe, they've been watching us too. There's something strangely human about wanting to understand the sky. We've been doing it since the beginning, long before telescopes, before radar, before words like UAP or classified. Our ancestors stared upward from campfires and coastlines, tracing patterns in the stars that whispered of gods, destinies, and unseen watchers. And perhaps, even then, they sensed what modern science is only now rediscovering, that the act of looking into the unknown changes both the seer and the seen. In the end, it's not just the universe we're studying, it's ourselves, inside the Pentagon's UAP task force. Amid all the equations, analysis logs, and sensor data, a quiet realization began to emerge. The more they looked outward, the more they saw inward reflections of human limitation, curiosity, and longing. One of the lead physicists, a man who had spent decades decoding radar anomalies, wrote in his private notes, "Every unknown object reveals something about our own blindness." He wasn't being poetic. He meant it, literally. The data gaps, the blurred frames, the unexplained accelerations, all of them pointed not just to what we didn't know about the sky, but to what we still didn't understand about perception itself. How much of what we call mystery is simply the edge of our own understanding. For every radar trace that defied explanation, there were human fingerprints on the process. The way an analyst framed a question, the bias built into a sensor. The story a pilot told afterward, even the word phenomenon began to feel humbling, as if the real phenomenon was not the object, but the observer. And yet, that humility was not defeat. It was a kind of awakening, because to admit that we don't know is not weakness. It's the first step toward wonder. One of the task force's senior members described sitting in the observation bay late one night, long after everyone else had gone home. He was reviewing infrared footage, small white orbs drifting silently over the Pacific, when something in him shifted. "I stopped thinking about evidence," he said, "and started thinking about connection." He realized that for all our instruments and calculations, what truly bound these investigations together wasn't technology, it was awe, that quiet, almost sacred feeling of standing before something larger than explanation, something vast enough to make us feel small, yet gentle enough to make us feel safe. Maybe that's what draws humanity toward these mysteries, not fear, but kinship, not the suspicion that we are being watched, but the hope that we are not alone. And perhaps that longing is built into us for a reason. Maybe consciousness itself is a bridge, a signal reaching outward, waiting for another signal to answer back. We've always wanted the sky to speak. We built myths around it, sent prayers through it, launched our machines into it. And when we finally started hearing strange whispers from beyond the clouds, we didn't know whether to feel terrified or understood. When the Pentagon's latest UAP report was quietly released, one section stood out to the few who read between the lines. Buried beneath data tables and military phrasing, it said, "There is an observable consistency of interaction between human attention and unidentified aerial phenomena." Attention, not detection, not pursuit. Attention. It was as if the authors were admitting that the mystery was not purely technological, it was relational. The unknown, in some quiet way, responded to us, and that realization changed everything. You could almost imagine the universe leaning closer when we look up, the way an ocean reflects your face when you peer into it, shimmering and unsteady, yet undeniably there. That's the human horizon, the invisible line between what we know and what still waits beyond our comprehension. And every time we push that boundary, we discover not just new data, but new depths within ourselves. The mystery outside becomes a mirror of the mystery within. Think about it. Our species has crossed oceans, mapped planets, split atoms, and sent signals across light years, all because something inside us refuses to rest in certainty. We are built to explore, built to ask questions that might never have answers. The UAP files are, in many ways, a continuation of that oldest story, the human desire to find meaning in the silence. And maybe that's the secret buried in all those classified pages, that the search for truth out there is a reflection of the search for peace in here. Late-night analysts started calling it the mirror effect. Not officially, not in reports, but in their quiet conversations after midnight, when the glow of the monitors made everyone look a little ghostly. They noticed that their reactions to the unknown often revealed more about them than about the phenomena themselves. Those who feared chaos saw a threat. Those who loved mystery saw possibility. Those who sought control saw a challenge. In the end, the sky became a projection, not just of light and motion, but of human spirit. And so, when you look up tonight, wherever you are, let yourself remember that the same sky stretches above the Pentagon's rooftops, above pilots crossing oceans, above satellites whispering in the dark, and somewhere, perhaps, above something that's looking back, not in dominance or secrecy, but in recognition, because awareness, in any form, seeks company, and the universe, if it truly is aware, might be just as curious about us as we are about it. So breathe deeply. Let the hum of night surround you. The air between you and the stars is thin, but it's full of stories written in silence, carried by light, waiting to be seen. And in that stillness, know this: the mystery is not an enemy to be solved. It's a conversation to be continued, a reminder that the human horizon is not the edge of knowledge. It's the beginning of wonder. Sometimes when scientists stare long enough into the unknown, something unexpected stares quietly back, not in the data itself, but in the way the data feels. That was what the Pentagon researchers began whispering about, somewhere between curiosity and disbelief. They called it the resonance effect. It wasn't officially recognized, not written in any report, but those who worked long nights in the dim corridors of data analysis began to notice it, a strange synchrony between human attention and unexplained phenomena. It began innocently, patterns, coincidences, moments that didn't belong to coincidence alone. A radar spike following a heated discussion about anomalies. Infrared readings that flared briefly when analysts were most focused and dimmed when the team turned away. Footage that seemed to react, however subtly, to the presence of human observation, as though the phenomena somehow knew it was being seen. One physicist, calm and methodical by training, once wrote in an encrypted memo, "The more intently we search, the more the data shifts." It's as if curiosity itself leaves fingerprints. He deleted the line afterward, worried it would sound too mystical. But those who read it before it vanished never forgot, because secretly they agreed. The numbers had a heartbeat when analysts compared UAP sightings against human behavioral data, sleep cycles, emotional states, even collective stress levels. Small correlations began to emerge. On nights of global tension, the skies seemed more active. During moments of peace or awe, the readings softened. Of course, there were logical explanations: sensor anomalies, environmental interference, confirmation bias. The mind seeks patterns where none exist. And yet, deep down, even the skeptics felt something stirring, as though reality itself were responding to the emotional gravity of the observer. It was subtle, gentle, never proof, only possibility, but it echoed through the data like a soft pulse beneath static. The senior scientist on the team, a quiet man who had once studied quantum entanglement, said one evening, "Maybe consciousness isn't just watching the universe. Maybe it's participating." His colleagues laughed nervously, but later, when they were alone with the monitors, some of them whispered the same words under their breath, not as theory, but as prayer. Because what if the act of seeing, truly seeing, shapes what is seen? There's a rhythm to the night sky when you slow down enough to notice it. The steady drift of stars, the deep silence between them, the faint hum of Earth itself turning beneath your feet. Perhaps the Pentagon's data, in all its complexity, was only capturing this rhythm, the pulse of awareness meeting awareness. They began running simulations, removing human input entirely. No observers, no live monitors. The anomalies reduced. Then, when they reintroduced human observation, the phenomena returned. It was as if the unknown required an audience not to perform, but to exist in full clarity. For decades, spiritual traditions had said something similar in softer words, that the universe listens, that attention itself is a sacred act, that reality responds to wonder like a flower to light. Now, in the sterile corridors of defense analysis, surrounded by cold equipment and the distant hum of air vents, these ancient ideas were returning, dressed in the language of modern science. One night, a young data analyst found herself staring at a single frame of UAP footage, an orb gliding silently over the ocean, reflecting the faintest glimmer of moonlight. She said later that it wasn't fear she felt, but recognition. It wasn't something watching me, she said softly. It was something sharing the moment. And that phrase, sharing the moment, began to circulate among the small, closed circle of researchers, because it captured something the data alone could not explain, that perhaps these phenomena weren't invaders or visitors, but mirrors appearing in moments when humanity collectively looked up with a certain kind of openness, not to prove something, but to remind us that mystery still breathes between us and the stars. There were other patterns, small, quiet details that no one wanted to publish. During mass observations, instruments detected micro-variations in electromagnetic fields, faint but measurable. And yet, those same variations often mirrored the emotional state of the observers. Heart rates and data fluctuations pulsed in near-synchron. It was as though the boundary between human physiology and the sky's response had briefly blurred. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidence has always been the language of mystery. One declassified note, released without much attention, mentioned that some UAP encounters correlated with what researchers called cognitive resonance fields. The phrase was vague, almost poetic, but those who studied it knew what it meant. It was the acknowledgement that human perception might be part of the equation, that maybe these encounters were not just seen by the human eye, but invited by it. A physicist once compared it to sonar, where sound only reveals what's there when it meets an echo. Perhaps reality itself waits for consciousness to listen. And when we listen deeply enough, something answers. If you listen closely, you can almost sense that resonance now, not in the sky, but in your own quiet attention. The way your thoughts slow when you gaze into darkness. The way the night seems to breathe with you. When the world falls silent, the Pentagon's analysts may have called it echoes in the data, but poets would call it communion, the meeting point between mind and cosmos, a conversation not of words, but of awareness. And that may be the greatest revelation hidden in all those files, not that we are being visited, but that the universe is responsive, that in the vast silence of space, attention itself is a dialogue. Every signal we send is also a question, and every anomaly, a whisper in reply. So perhaps the purpose of these investigations isn't to find proof of something alien, but to learn how to listen, truly, quietly, completely. Because only when we listen without demanding, the universe begins to speak. Some of the researchers, burned out from years of secrecy and scrutiny, began leaving small notes to each other in the lab, tiny paper slips under computer keyboards, as if to remind themselves that behind all the data and analysis, there was still wonder. One note said simply, maybe the truth doesn't come in answers. It comes in echoes tonight as the stars shimmer softly above your window. Remember that same hum still threads through the night, the same quiet resonance between curiosity and the cosmos, the same pulse of data and dream that makes the human heart lift when looking up. You don't need proof to feel it, just awareness, just stillness, just the gentle realization that the universe, vast, ancient, unknowable, may also be listening back. And in that soft exchange between you and the sky, something wordless yet profound continues to unfold, an echo that has no beginning and no end by now. After years of declassifications, debates, and sleepless nights in the Pentagon's quietest offices, something remarkable had become clear. The mystery in the sky was not only above us, it was within us, the UAP files, for all their data points and technical jargon, had begun to resemble something more like a mirror than a map. Each report reflected the era that produced it, the minds that observed it, the fears and hopes of those who tried to define it. The unknown had a way of shaping itself around our perception, wearing the mask of whatever we were ready to believe. During the Cold War, it looked like technology in the ancient world. It looked like gods. And now, in the age of information, it looks like light, distant, shapeless, intelligent, yet elusive. It changes with us. It evolves with our understanding. And that may be the greatest mystery of all. One senior investigator once whispered during an after-hours meeting, maybe the universe isn't hiding anything from us. Maybe it's just showing us who we are, one reflection at a time. He said it half-jokingly, but no one laughed, because by then, every person in that room had begun to feel the strange weight of introspection that came with studying the inexplicable. The deeper they looked into the files, the more they began to sense that the real discovery wasn't about them, it was about us. The reports were full of human fingerprints, pilots describing awe rather than fear, technicians hesitating to classify what they couldn't define, civilians filing quiet, trembling accounts of something beautiful they couldn't explain. And as those stories accumulated, a pattern emerged. The unknown, whatever it truly was, seemed to choose its witnesses carefully. It revealed itself not to the loudest, but to the stillest, not to those who demanded proof, but to those who simply watched with open eyes, as though the mystery itself responded to humility, appearing in the spaces where certainty had fallen silent in those moments. The analysts began to see the UAP files as something sacred, not sacred in the religious sense, but in the sense that they carried a kind of reverence. Each encounter, each anomaly, each blurred image was a reminder that the universe still had boundaries beyond measurement. Despite all our instruments, we were still part of something unfathomable. And perhaps that's what the unknown wanted to show us, that the human spirit, for all its logic and structure, still thrives on wonder. When one researcher retired, she left behind a handwritten note on her desk, folded neatly between two stacks of reports. It read, "We wanted answers. What we found was meaning." And those few words carried more truth than any radar analysis ever could, because meaning doesn't live in equations or flight paths. Meaning lives in the silence between them, in the awe that rises when we realize how small we are and how vast everything else remains. That's the paradox of the unknown. the closer you approach it, the more it vanishes until all that's left is your own reflection staring back from the glass of your instruments. Maybe that's why every civilization, across every age, has felt drawn to the stars, not just to conquer or understand them, but to see themselves illuminated by their cold, distant light dot. Each generation rediscovers the same truth, that the cosmos is less a mystery to be solved and more a mirror to remind us who we are becoming. You can feel it, can't you? That quiet connection between your breath and the night sky. The soft awareness that the same atoms that form your body once drifted through the heart of ancient stars. Every heartbeat is, in a way, a message from the universe to itself, a pulse of stardust, remembering its origin. And maybe that's why the mystery of UAPs resonates so deeply, because it whispers something older than language. That the unknown is not foreign, it's familiar, it's us. Looking back through the veil of distance and forgetting the Pentagon. Analysts might never have written that in their reports, but you can sense it between the lines. Their language grew softer near the end, their phrasing more philosophical, their conclusions less about phenomena and more about perception. The further they traveled into the data, the more the data turned into poetry. One memo ended simply, "Observation reveals the observer." That was all. No numbers, no signatures, just that single sentence, the kind that lingers long after the light fades from the screen. So, maybe this entire story of declassified files and unexplained objects was never really about aliens or technology or secrets. Maybe it was about awakening, about realizing that humanity, for all its searching, is not standing at the edge of understanding, but in the middle of a vast reflection that goes on forever. The mystery doesn't live out there. It lives in the way we see. It's born in the stillness between curiosity and acceptance. And every time we look up and wonder, the mirror brightens, showing us just enough to remind us that there's more. And so, as the Pentagon lights go dim, as the data screens fade to black, and as the last analyst leaves the room, something deeper remains, not the hum of technology, but the quiet hum of awareness itself, that knowing silence that says, you are part of the mystery you're trying to understand tonight. As you lie beneath the same sky that all those researchers watched from their windows, let that realization settle softly in your mind, that you, too, are one of the witnesses, that the universe chose you this very moment to remember its own reflection, and that maybe, just maybe, the unknown isn't waiting to be found, it's waiting to be felt. The night has grown quiet now. Washington sleeps. The corridors of the Pentagon lie still, and the data screens that once pulsed with coded light have dimmed to a soft electric hum somewhere in a locked room. The UAP files rest, folders sealed, signatures fading into memory, their pages heavy with questions that no longer demand answers. Outside, the sky stretches endlessly, patient, eternal, the same sky that watched the first fires of humanity flicker to life, the same sky that reflected in the eyes of every dreamer, every scientist, every quiet soul who ever looked up and felt that wordless pull toward something beyond understanding. And now, as the world turns toward midnight, it whispers again. You can almost hear it if you listen closely, a low, endless murmur that isn't quite sound, the gentle resonance of the atmosphere, the shifting of air across unseen wings, the sigh of distant clouds. It's the language of the cosmos, slow, ancient, and calm. It doesn't speak in sentences or signs. It speaks in stillness. And tonight, as you listen, the stillness feels almost alive. Somewhere above the ocean, an unblinking orb drifts quietly through the mist. Its motion is steady. Its light, pale and deliberate, a solitary presence moving in silence, beyond radar, beyond reason. It does not announce itself. It does not flee. It simply moves as though it belongs here. A ghost of light traveling through our atmosphere like a thought through the mind of the universe. And perhaps it does. Perhaps these mysteries are not visitors at all, but manifestations, expressions of consciousness woven through matter, reflections of curiosity itself, the universe dreaming through us and around us at once. Down below, someone else is awake, a lone researcher sitting by a window, sipping cold coffee, watching the same night sky. They no longer look for proof, they simply look there. Instruments are off now, their notebooks closed, but something in their heart remains open, a quiet acceptance that the mystery was never meant to be solved, only shared. And in that still moment, as the city breathes beneath them, they feel a strange peace, because sometimes the greatest revelation is learning to live comfortably beside the unknown. Maybe that's what the sky has been trying to tell us all along, that we are not meant to conquer its secrets, but to listen to them. That the unknown isn't a puzzle, it's a lullaby. Every flicker of light, every silent movement among the stars, every question that lingers without answer is part of that song, a melody written in wavelengths too vast for words. And as the world grows quiet, that melody becomes clearer, folding softly around the edges of sleep. Humanity has searched upward with telescopes, with faith, with fear, with hope, and every age has found a reflection of itself among the stars. The ancients found gods, the sailors found directions, the scientists found questions, and now we find wonder, the most peaceful discovery of all. Because to wonder is to remember that you are part of something infinite, that even in your smallest moment, the same energy that forms galaxies moves through your breath. You are not apart from the mystery, you are made of it. In one of the final memos filed under the Pentagon's UAP project, a single line appears without context or signature. It reads, "Perhaps the purpose of mystery is to keep us listening." No coordinates, no explanation, just a quiet sentence drifting like a feather through official language. But maybe that was the point, because listening is all that has ever connected us to each other, to the night, to whatever lies beyond it. So, tonight, as you lie there beneath your own whispering sky, let that calm awareness fill you. You don't need to understand. You only need to feel the steady rhythm of your breathing, the pulse beneath your fingertips, the faint hum of the world as it turns. All of it is part of the same silent conversation that has been unfolding since the beginning of time, a dialogue between the seen and the unseen, between knowing and mystery, between you and the infinite. Maybe that's what those who studied the files were chasing, not disclosure, but communion, not answers, but presence. And now, long after the reports have faded and the debates have quieted, The mystery remains, unfolding softly above the world like a living, breathing dream. The stars have seen it all. Before empires rise and fall, languages are born and forgotten, and through it all, the same quiet question lingers between the constellations. Are you awake enough to listen? So listen now, to the hush between your thoughts, to the whisper that drifts through the open window, to the silence that feels strangely full, as if the universe itself were leaning close, waiting for your next breath, because maybe, somewhere out there, the unknown isn't distant at all. Maybe it's already here, woven into your dreams, your heartbeat, your quiet curiosity that refuses to fade. Let the mystery hold you now, let it rock you gently into rest. The questions can wait, the stars will keep their secrets until morning. And when you close your eyes, the same sky that watched the Pentagon's hidden lights will still be watching you, not as an observer, but as a companion, because you are part of its story. And tonight, that story is still being written in silence, in wonder, in peace, perhaps some mysteries, the narrator whispers one final time, are meant to stay between the stars and our dreams, not to be solved, but to remind us that the universe still has stories left to whisper. Fade to silence, soft hum of distant wind. The screen darkens and the whispering sky continues.